I was born in a taxi cab on my way to the hospital in St. Rose, de Lac, Manitoba. From the records that I have and from my mom, I was apprehended as soon as I entered the hospital. So apprehension started that day, and separation started. The process started that throughout my stay in the hospital. So I got pneumonia, so I had to actually stay in the hospital. I was in the hospital for three months. I was a preemie, and so I ended up staying. And upon my release, so I was born in October. I was released in December, and I was released into foster care. And then I was adopted a year later. I grew up and was raised Ukrainian. I went to school to learn Ukrainian. I spoke a bit and danced, and I took on the culture. I think for me, my childhood was, I would say, flawless. I have a sister, adopted sister. We were both Indigenous children. My sister's First Nations, and we were just the two of us when we came into the family. And we were told at that time, we were told that we were chosen because my adopted mother, couldn't have children. But at age 6, my adopted mother told me the truth, and said that that I was adopted, and that really affected me. It really shook me to the core. And I usually tell people that all I heard was that I didn't belong. And so I went on autopilot, and autopilot from that point on till my late 30s when I finally repatriated with the family. But as some of the stories that we've heard, the issue of identity became a huge issue. I was at the time, I've always been two-spirited, and I was struggling with that identity. But I was really, before all that started, I was struggling with my identity as who am I? And so I lived in a very precarious state of being. I wrestled with different ethnic backgrounds, because I began I started with the notion that my parents were these, a doctor and a lawyer. I started all these different thought processes of what I thought my parents were. It never really occurred to me that they gave me away. I was just really fantasizing about the fact that they might have been somebody different and better than where I was. And so, I kind of struggled with that, on the streets. I would kind of think would that be my mom, or if I was walking around, I would just really kind of be searching. I went into search mode. And I kind of really, sort of, like I said, took on those different personas. I think I felt like I was one person one day, and then I would change to somebody else. I would be morphing all the time into, Italian or Spanish, or those different ethnic backgrounds. And in that, I was really dealing with some serious issues in terms of who I was, and that led me down a path of addictions at a very early age. In fact, I started running away from home. Things got so toxic between me and my adopted family, specifically my adopted mother. Because I think in hindsight, when you think about it, a mother will know when their child is rejecting them, and I rejected everything, even though I was trying to pretend to be somebody I wasn't. But I wasn't really, I wasn't connecting, and I became this joker, somebody that wasn't, living in realistic land. And I think they were trying really hard to sort of bring me back, but I was really far gone. And so, the arguments started, the fighting started, the rebellion started, and a lot of that was attributed to the fact that maybe I was, a teenager, but it really manifested itself in drugs in alcohol abuse at a very early age, and tobacco and partying, and just really some really risky behaviors. So, in that era, during that timeline, over the course of that, I put, my adopted family, my parents specifically, through a lot. And I think I made the conscious decision in the late 80s. I had moved out, and I already had a taste of freedom, and tried to go back to school and come home, and it just didn't really work. I was struggling with the demons, these demons that of identity that I couldn't really fight, and so I would rather medicate myself with alcohol and so forth. And I really took my parents, adopted parents, through hell and back, and I was there, so we were all there together. And I made the conscious decision to, at one time we had a really, really bad fight, and I basically made the decision to disconnect. I felt that everything was so toxic that there was no way of ever going back and trying to repair. I wasn't ready to repair, and so I made the conscious decision of disconnecting from them, and I have been estranged from them from that point on. So that's sort of how it was. It was very, very difficult to, you realize that when I made that decision, I didn't realize how much that would affect my life, because all of a sudden I was alone. I was literally alone. And so, it was the early 80s or late 80s, and I went into the 90s, and I ended up contracting HIV as a youth, and was really struggling with addictions and depression and anxiety. I was really trying to medicate myself from all the pain. And I found my family. I found a temporary family, I guess, in the gay community, and really took that on, because there finally I found an identity that I could, I felt safe. It was kind of a family, even though it was dysfunctional. At least I had these, brothers and sisters, as I wouldn't call them that, but I think about it now. But they were all in the same boat as me. We were told that we were Indigenous. I just didn't really know if I was First Nations or Métis. When I was in kindergarten, I actually got treaty money. I was so excited. I took the $5 with me and I bolted home. And the school called my mom and said that I couldn't keep it, but because everybody thought that I was treaty Indian. I was so dark, and my pictures, you can tell it's easy to make the mistake. But that was the first time I actually faced, in my view, racism, because I couldn't keep the $5. So there was different times in my life where there would be Indigenous people, taking interest in my life, knowing that I was an Indigenous child. And later on in my life, I reconnected with some of those people after I found out that I was, through my repatriation with my family, that I came from a Métis family. So, I was living in an Indigenous community, Métis First Nations community. I've always been connected to that, but I wasn't connected to it. When I think back, I think the only thing that I really saw that was Indigenous, or anything that would remind me of that, is like Pocahontas from Walt Disney, and that's pretty much my my connection to that. I mean, I've heard stories from my adopted mother that they lived beside an Indigenous community, a First Nations community, and they used to actually share, the First Peoples would share their food with their family to make sure that they got to eat, and so that was a positive thing. But what I saw in my youth, because we lived beside a reserve, Opaskwayak First Nations, was poverty, and I created a mindset that I was better than them and that I wasn't them. And then when they talked to me, alcohols and drugs were alcohol was predominant in the community. And just, you know, from my side, living in the non-Indigenous, we had a beautiful home. Our home was manicured. We went on vacation, we had food, clothes, whatever. I never really ever thought about that, but when we saw the other side, I built up the idea that they were lazy and that they deserved all that. And so I kept away from, it made me distance myself from the culture. You know, what stands out for me is I had a home in Beacon that was muffled. It was kind of like, there was this need to come home, but I was extremely scared to even think about that. And so, you know, the pain was so extremely excruciating that I was doing everything in my power. And I was slowly killing myself, actually. That's what I was doing. I think back now as a youth, you know, dealing with the fact that I had no identity, I didn't know where I was sick, that I came pretty close to death before the antiretrovirals came in. I mean, I think about that, and it's, you know, and I remember my granny, when I first repatriated the granny, it was a miracle. You know, and so, you know, I think for me, that just thinking about that really makes me think about what others are going through or are going through at this time. And so, yeah, it was really hard. I found, you know, not belonging and feeling like an outsider and trying and being the type of person that I was, and my whole world was destroyed at age 6. Without having the supports that I needed, so desperately needed to excel in my life. What would my life have looked like had that connection been available? Had that cultural connection to the Métis community that I lived beside and lived in? What would that have looked like? And so, that's what haunts me, and it really shakes me as a person to the core that I was so close but felt so far away. I was getting sick, actually. I just came out of a scare. The antiretrovirals had just come in about 95, 96. And I finally kind of made it through that I made it through, and I was on the antiretrovirals, but I was suffering from, now what I understand was PTSD. The anxiety, the voices, the flashbacks, you know, like even when I think about it now, I was looking through plastic and looking and seeing green walls. And I realized that I was actually flashing back to my being a baby, and just remembering certain smells and certain sounds and things like that. And that during that time, I was on the ARVs. I couldn't even function, and I was so angry. I was beyond angry. The rage that was so far inside me, I probably could have burnt somebody on the spot. I could have raised a field of grain just with my energy because of how angry I was. And it was through an Aboriginal AIDS service organization that I was sitting in a sharing circle that an elder told me that I needed to go home. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But, I thought about it for a while. I sat and pondered. That was probably maybe one of the first decisions I actually really, instead of just doing something, I actually really had to think about it. And it just so happened that I had to go see a doctor, and that doctor started asking me questions about my medical background, like what's your family health background? Do they have diabetes? Do they have? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. Every time they asked that question, I would just make something up. But this time, I just said, I don't know. I don't have no clue. And that's when I finally realized that it was like, okay, maybe it's time to go for it. And so, I made the connection with Child Family Services, and we began a process. So the process was that they do the search, and within 30 days they found a match. They found my brother, sister, and my mom. There was 3 of them looking for me. They matched. And the next meeting that we sort of had was around, the next process was writing letters. So I drafted 3 letters, and it's kind of funny. I don't even remember what I wrote in those letters. We can't even find those letters. But one of the things that I was asked is, did you want to meet them? And I said, yeah, I think I'd like to do that. But one of the most important things they need to know is that I have HIV and I'm gay. That's it. I have a bottom line. And 30 days after that, we decided, it was in May, we were going to meet for the first time. And I had made some other requests. I didn't want to connect. I didn't want nobody to hug me. I wanted to sit on one side of the table, and they needed to be on the other side of the table, and I just needed that space. And I remember I went and bought a bunch of roses. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. A friend of mine gave me his car so I could get to the CFS offices, and I finally got there, and I was sitting in the room first, and just shortly after that, they came in. And the only thing I tell everybody is that my mom looked like Loretta Lynn. She had like long dark hair. She was really short. My mom's very, very petite, and they both came in and they moved. My mom had her support person, and my brother and sister came, and we kind of just sort of acknowledged each other and so forth, and we kind of talked. And so the worker, a lot of that is a blur. But I think the most important thing that happened was when we were going to say goodbye to each other, because I kind of was thinking that it would just be a meet and greet, and then I would go back and think about it. But my mom came up to me and asked me if she could hug me. And I said yes. And that's when everything sparked. That's when that connection, that reconnection happened. And so, shortly after that, I had to go to my grandparents. I had to go see my granny, my grandpa, and the family. My mom took me there, and it was, I don't know if you saw Anton Fisher, that movie, Anton Fisher. It's about a African-American Marine that was in foster home to foster home, and he finally actually found his family. And the first thing that they did was actually he had to go see the elders. And so that's what my mom and family did. Is they took me to my grandparents, and my grandparents were sitting at the table, and I came, and My grandmother grabbed my hands and she looked at me and she just said, "Welcome home." And it was very emotional for me. And all the family was there. It was insane. There was pictures all over the walls of my family, and I just sort of was in this daze for most of it. But those are the sort of the things that I remember the most, was being acknowledged and welcomed by my elders, by my grandparents. And it was the right decision. I was very lucky in terms of that. I have a brother that was also scooped, and he was already home already. I was the last one to come home. And my grandparents were very religious. My grandmother was a very religious person, and my parents and my family are very, very spiritual. So they prayed. They prayed every day for me to come home. And I came home, so. And I've had this wonderful relationship. I've had this relationship with my grandparents. My granny passed away a couple of years ago. So I got to be she always called me her baby. Sorry. But I had the gift of being able to know her. And I learned a lot about their life, how they struggled. And I've known my aunties and uncles, my brothers and sisters. I have an older brother. I was the oldest in the family, so we had to try to figure out where I was in the pecking order. So it took us some time. It took a lot of time in terms of trying to figure out where I belonged in the family. But it was really natural. I never felt like an outsider ever. I was just trying to find my own. Since we repatriated, my mom gave me a lot of information about what happened. I asked for more information from Child Family Services, and they really, their files are very different from what my mom's story is. In their files, they wrote that my mother gave me up for adoption, and my mother's recollection is she didn't. She didn't sign anything. She didn't. She and my grandparents were fighting for me in the courts. They made these unattainable demands through the courts that that someone had to have a job and both of them had to have a house and whatever. They came from a poor Métis family. Like what's that all about? There was no option for me to go live with another family. I have my mother's truth, and so that's my truth. I truly believe that they went after me. They went after my brother, and they were going after my sister. And so, having reconnected with my family, I've been able to get some of the stories and some of the strength to start figuring out what my story is. The crux of everything started with loss of land, loss of cultural rights, loss of Indigenous rights. It started there, and it manifested itself into the governments of this country assaulting children and taking them away from their homes and their families to assimilate them into mainstream society. That is a revelation that has really changed and realigned my thinking patterns. I was thinking about this the other day, and I just really, I would love to go to my home, because I haven't actually been to my home, Crane River. That's where my family's from. And so for me, I think what really needs to happen is I actually need to go home to that geographical area where I was born. I went to the place where I was born in St. Rose de Lac, but I've always driven past Crane River, but I never really went there. And so for me, I think that would be something that I would really like to do before my mom passes away, or or whatever. But I think that's some unfinished business that I need to do, and I think that's that's a really important part when we talk about going home. It's not necessarily like with your family, but you need to go to that geographical space. There should be a few things. One is an apology. I think that's important. I also think that there should be a day for 60 Scoop adoptees. I think they should have the opportunity to, there should be a day where we recognize the wrongs, the current wrongs that are still going on, but for 60 Scoop adoptees, a day of recognition that that informs Canadians what has happened. Because I think, Holocaust, they have the Holocaust and they have their certain things. We need to make sure that we never forget what has happened. I think the other elements to that would be, I think I'd like to see healing programs, repatriation programs, and cultural programs. And, in terms of enabling adoptees, survivors to be able to do some of the work that they need in terms of repatriating or returning back to their space. I also think that there should be mental health supports and programs available that have like a long-term kind of space, not like the Indian Residential School Settlement Program where you get 6 and then that's it. The harm and damage has been done from, if you're suffering from PTSD, it takes a long time to go through the process, and 6 wouldn't even cut it. So I'd like to see, long-term mental health services available. And I think that, like I said, I think the other part of that is the financial compensation. I think maybe if we can get the healing programs and those kind of things in place, maybe adoptees could use those resources to help them either, do their language or do whatever, or to help them better themselves. Because I think the idea around scooping was to integrate us into mainstream society, give us a better chance. Some of us are not even educated. We have grade 12 education. We haven't been able to really meet our full potential. So, there needs to be those kind of resources. They really sold everybody, including my adopted parents, that they were doing something right for the family, when what really they were doing was being destroying families. Because not only is they destroy my family, but the adopted family's also been destroyed. I think what's really important is that that people need to know, especially adoptees, is they need to go home. And no matter what that looks like, it's important. I'm really glad that I made that decision, because I was very disconnected from everything. It wouldn't have mattered if I was Indigenous or not. I was extremely disconnected, and I think it's it's a piece of who you are that you need to bring back. And going home, no matter what that's going to look like, is a key part of your healing process. And I think if I was going to give a message to Canadians, I think my message would be that they need to understand their colonial past and how that has impacted on Indigenous peoples in this country. And to really, really examine that, and to really hold those that are in power accountable to what has transpired. Because remember, this happened to children. I was a baby when this was going on. And my story, is different from, many stories, but the commonality of that is the destruction of our families.